If you have been on alternative news channels for a while, you have heard predictions such as Nesara, Gesara, JFK Jr., and Michael Jackson being alive. Many of these predictions originated from Q alerts. Podcasters at the time shared such predictions but never discussed how it would happen. While Trump has been performing at lightning speed and we can see inklings of the predictions made years ago, things are beginning to fit into place like a puzzle with many pieces circling above us. For those who aren't familiar, the US dollar is expected to crash and re-emerge as a gold-backed currency again. This will involve the elimination of the Federal Reserve and their bill collector, the IRS. We were told that Nesara Gesara would be enacted. Debts will be forgiven, and we will move into the golden age of prosperity. Today we are going to discuss the difference between a monetary reset and Nesara Gesara, which are related but distinct concepts. First, let me ask you to help me out with the channel and share, like, and subscribe. Don't forget to also hit the bell so that you are notified of new video uploads, and if you'd like to leave a super thanks tip, it's under the 3 dots below the video. You will want to stay till the end of this video because there are twists at every turn, from evidence of Nesara Gesara to counter moves by the elite. So let's get into it. A monetary reset versus Nesara Gesara. The monetary reset refers to a major restructuring of the global financial system, often involving a shift in currency values, debt forgiveness, or a return to asset-backed money, such as gold or silver. It can be initiated by central banks, governments, or financial institutions due to economic crises, hyperinflation, or the failure of the current system. Examples include proposals for a gold-backed BRICS currency, the quantum financial system, QFS, or a return to the gold standard. The reset may or may not include debt forgiveness for individuals. On the other hand, Nesara, National Economic Security and Reformation Act, was a U.S.-focused proposal, while Gesara, Global Economic Security and Reformation Act, expands it worldwide. The act introduced debt forgiveness, abolish income tax, restore constitutional law, and implement a gold-backed currency. It is associated with suppressed technologies, financial liberation, and major economic reforms benefiting the people. Skeptics consider it to be more of a theoretical or speculative proposal, but some believe it is being quietly implemented behind the scenes. Some have reported that President Bill Clinton was forced to sign it at gunpoint. In a minute, we are going to look at Elon Musk's part in all this, but first, we need to look at a little background. So it's important to know the differences between a monetary reset and Nesara Gesara. First, a monetary reset is a strict economic restructuring by the central banks and global elites. Debt forgiveness is possible, but it would be limited. Our tax system may change, but there will still be taxes and currency may or may not become gold-backed. Nesara Gesara is a broader socio-economic reform that will be overseen by benevolent forces. Full cancellation of personal debt is expected and income tax is abolished. Gold-backed currency is part of the plan and suppressed technologies are promised. Now you know the difference between the two. We are going to expand a bit on an important aspect of Nesara Gesara, which is the RV or revaluation of currencies, particularly those of certain countries such as the Iraqi dinar, Zimbabwe zim, and Vietnamese dong, which are believed to be undervalued due to historical economic conditions. The idea is that these currencies will be revalued to reflect their true asset-backed value, such as their assets in gold, oil, and minerals, which would lead to a significant wealth redistribution where people across the world will prosper through universal prosperity programs or humanitarian projects. The RV or revaluation is part of a larger global currency reset or GCR, where all currencies will be adjusted based on gold or other tangible assets. It's kind of like a merit system for money. Since DOGE is pulling back the curtain on the fraudulent distribution of assets and embezzlement by public officials and government employees, the confidence in the US dollar is bound to plummet. Is this the stimulus for the crash of the dollar? But it gets better. Audit Fort Knox. For some reason, many people are calling for an audit of Fort Knox. Could this be the next step in the program? Let's take a look. Everyone has heard of Fort Knox, but do we really know anything about it? Fort Knox is a United States Army post in Kentucky, which houses the United States Gold Bullion Depository and is located in north-central Kentucky, about 30 miles southwest of Louisville. Fort Knox itself is an active U.S. Army installation, controlled by the Department of Defense. The U.S. Bullion Depository is owned and operated by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, but the tangled web never stops. The United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox stores a significant portion of the U.S. gold reserves. The exact contents are classified, but it primarily contains gold bullion in the form of standard 400-ounce bars. It also reportedly holds historical artifacts and important documents at times. As of the last official report, Fort Knox holds approximately 147.3 million ounces, or 4,582 metric tons of gold, which is about 56% of the U.S. Treasury's gold reserves. The remaining gold reserves are stored at other locations, including 54 million ounces at West Point Mint and 67 million ounces at other U.S. mints. The total global gold reserves are estimated at about 261 million ounces, or 34,000 metric tons. The only audit of Fort Knox occurred in 1974, when a team from the General Accounting Office under Nixon conducted an audit that included a physical count of the gold in the vault. But it wasn't an entirely independent audit, as the Treasury Department oversaw the process. Allegedly, the U.S. Treasury currently holds about 261 million troy ounces of gold, with the official price of $42.22 per ounce. That means that the books say the gold that we own is only worth about $11 billion. The current spot price of gold is actually worth $2,916.50. That means that today, the disclosed 261 million ounces of reserves in control of the Treasury is actually worth about $761 billion. So, a revaluation of our gold assets is definitely necessary, but the situation gets muddier. Shortly after people began urging DOGE to audit Fort Knox, the flash floods in Kentucky began, where 14 people have died so far, and the floods are right in the area of Fort Knox. What do you think? Could this be to stop access to inspectors? But there's more! Tunnels under Threadneedle Street in London store the second-largest gold stores in the world, and guess what? The Wall Street Journal reported that the US bank JP Morgan and the UK's HSBC are two of the biggest names flying gold into New York to cover losses on short positions. Are they trying to get the gold back into Fort Knox before DOGE gains entry? The media is telling us that the movement is occurring over fears that Trump will place tariffs on gold. Personally, I think they are trying to stop the surge of gold, collapse of the dollar, RV, and subsequent Nesara Gesara. It's all about the gold. We all say, could they possibly be this bold and this evil? The answer is yes. The Federal Reserve Clause. While the Federal Reserve doesn't own any of the gold in the control of the Treasury, they do own gold certificates against all 261 million ounces of this gold. So what does this mean? We are told that the Fed cannot demand physical gold for their certificates, but they do have a claim to our entire gold reserves. So what would happen if President Trump orders a revaluation? In February 1973, President Nixon's administration administratively revalued gold from $38 per ounce to $42.22 per ounce through Treasury Department action. This was done using the authority under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, without requiring a new law from Congress. So, while the left will likely try to stop him, this precedent suggests that a President Trump could direct a similar revaluation today without immediate legislative action. As mentioned above, this could increase our reserve value to about $761 billion, but our national debt is $37 trillion. So what three options does President Trump have regarding the Federal Reserve if the United States moves to a gold-backed currency? Congress would need to pass new legislation to reinstate a gold-backed monetary system and repeal the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which established the fiat currency system with the Federal Reserve, a private company, controlling the money supply. Repeal would take away the Fed's power, and they would likely resist such a move, as it's currently in complete control of our monetary policy and has refused an independent audit for years. So, we owe the Fed about $4.71 trillion. The balance of the U.S. debt includes about $9 trillion to foreign holders such as China, $18 trillion, or about 50% of our debt, is to U.S. investors such as banks and insurance companies. And you are going to love this. $4.3 trillion is owed to our own trust funds, which politicians have stolen from, to the tune of about $2.7 trillion borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund. About $1.5 trillion to the Federal Civil Service and Military Retirement Fund, $300 billion to Medicare, and about $500 billion to other governmental accounts. So, when you see all this waste on DEI, gender-affirming care, and cruel animal studies, remember that they stole from your retirement to do it. Federal corporation to constitutional republic. While the mainstream wants to differentiate between the United States and business corporations, the fact is that under U.S. law, the term United States is defined as a federal corporation in Title 28, Section 3002 of the U.S. Code. This legal definition refers to the U.S. government's capacity to act as an entity in legal and financial matters, such as entering contracts, holding assets, and taking on liabilities. So, all of these deals were made by the corporate entity. Many believe that this corporation will somehow be dissolved and the United States will become a constitutional republic again, as defined by the U.S. Constitution. You can be certain that there will be a lot of arguing over this one, but Congress does indeed have the authority to pass legislation to amend or dissolve the federal corporation under Title 28, which entered into all of these agreements to sell bonds and certificates. What this means is the United States would have to decide what to do with the debt of the United States corporation. There are three options. We could honor the Fed certificates and value them at the rate of $42.22 an ounce. We could honor the Fed certificates and value them at today's current value of $2,882 an ounce. We could tell the Fed to go pound sand because gold certificates became obsolete after the U.S. left the gold standard in 1971. They no longer represent a claim to physical gold, and thus, they cannot be redeemed for gold or anything else of value. The Federal Reserve or any other entity cannot collect or redeem them for gold because they are no longer tied to any physical assets. The controlled media will never tell you this. It took me hours to get ChatGPT to admit this, but it's very clear. Whether we dissolve the U.S. corporation or not, the Fed has no collateral for the war money and other waste they have been printing U.S. dollars to support. Now, if the U.S. has assets, they could sue to seize assets, so the cleanest way to do this appears to be a repeal of Title 28, Section 3002, which defines the U.S. as a federal corporation and entity of its own. The United States does own government lands, gold reserves, government-owned enterprises, and other assets, but their value doesn't come close to the $37 trillion debt. So basically, the United States is insolvent. How the legal minds will figure this one out, I'm not sure, but it's not as simple as defaulting and dissolving the corporation. The United States will have to do something to liquidate assets, and treasury bonds have been issued, which are not affected by the 1971 change to fiat currency. Those bonds will take precedent over our government-owned debt, such as Social Security. but it appears that if Nesara occurs prior to the dissolution of the U.S. corporation, assets could be used for reparations, restitution, and forgiveness programs so that the people of the United States come first. I've been hearing these stories about dissolving the United States, debt forgiveness, and restitution for nearly 10 years, and this is the first time that I have really looked into the reality of them occurring. The Fed, aka the elite, aka the shadow government, aka the evil ones, thought they swindled us out of all our gold certificates, which are now worthless. They hold additional treasury bonds which can be revaluated, restructured, or canceled. From everything I have learned, it definitely appears that we can repeal the Federal Reserve Act, which would move us back to gold-backed currency, and eliminate the Fed's control over us. Several other presidents have attempted to eliminate the Federal Reserve, namely John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. All three of them had assassination attempts, so pray for the president's safety as he brings us through these dangerous times of political and financial treachery. We could also dissolve the federal corporation by repealing Title 28, Section 3002 of the U.S. Code, which would revert us back to a constitutional republic, a completely different person or entity with no responsibility for the debt of the corporation. Are things being put in place? Calls for an audit of Fort Knox could result in some unusual results. For 40 years, whistleblowers have alleged that the gold in Fort Knox is missing. That makes me wonder what would happen if DOGE showed up at Fort Knox and the gold wasn't there. Well, it seems that people have asked Grok, which is Elon Musk's online AI software. When asked, what would happen if DOGE audited Fort Knox and there wasn't any gold there? Grok responded with several significant consequences. Specifically, Grok said that if the gold is gone, the value of gold will surge. So those of you that are sitting on tangible gold and silver, an audit of Fort Knox could trigger the increase we've been waiting for. Note, this is only tangible gold. Certificates could become worthless. The next thing that would happen is the dollar devaluation, which is what we've been hearing would happen. The credibility of the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve would be severely damaged. Also, there would be economic policy shifts, including a return to the gold standard or gold-backed currency. Is this the golden age that Trump is talking about? Are we getting really close, guys? I don't know, and I don't want to get you too excited, but trading circles are talking about a gold-backed reset at the central bank in Basel, Switzerland. Basel III changes the way that gold is treated in the banking system. Gold has been reclassified from a Tier 3 asset to a Tier 1 asset, which means that the banks can count 100% of the value as if it were cash or the U.S. Treasury. So is the Fed preparing for the event of a gold-backed monetary system? By making gold a Tier 1 asset, it is much more valuable to banks and a shift away from paper gold, ETFs, and futures towards physical gold. Interestingly, Basel III was introduced in 2017. It was extended several times and is now scheduled to go into effect on July 1, 2025, with a 3-year phase-in period. So you might want to just stick that date of July 1st somewhere in the back of your mind as we continue to watch this plan unfold. I say that Elon Musk and DOGE can't get into Fort Knox quick enough for me, but I believe that it will likely be one of the last audits after we stop the bleeding. It looks like the plan is to stop the money from going out immediately, which will put a hurting on those embezzling money from the U.S. government coffers, cutting off their money supply and weakening the deep state. They are moving along rapidly in this area. Pam Bondi is currently enforcing deportation in several cities. But once DOGE has assembled the evidence, I expect the FBI to open investigations and prosecutions to begin publicly. While predicate legislation may be enacted, revaluation, return to gold-backed currency, and the repeal of the Fed will probably occur sometime before July 1, 2025. I have no inside knowledge on this, but it follows that Nesara Gesara will occur after these changes are made. that's when things begin to really kick in. Expect deep state resistance at every step of the way, but it appears that returning to gold-backed currency is being anticipated by the moneymakers, and I'll bet they are not very happy. But being what they are, they will continue to adapt to each new change so that they benefit from it. So I'm really happy about the way things are moving along. I can't give you a date when anything is going to happen, and I hope that it's clear by now that nobody has those dates. What I can tell you is that moves are happening that definitely point to a gold-backed currency and Nesara Gesara in our near future.